This is not the video I planned to make this week, but a little hurricane named Beryl decided to come smashing through Houston and knock out all the power for 2.6 million people. That might be households and not actually people. We're a little unclear on the numbers and how they're doing their counting. As of now, 1 million people still do not have power. I am one of those people. I am camped out at my aunt's place. This is a cabin. Those are not my heads, not my decorating style either. But I'm happy to be here with electricity and, able to talk to you this way because there's air conditioning and it's still very hot here in Texas, which never makes for a good situation. So thankfully, I did bring something to work on that is sewing related, just in case I got stuck out here longer than anticipated. The power went out at my house at 7:30 on Monday morning, and it was still tolerable because, the AC had been on all night. And then by Tuesday, it was really too hot. The breeze from the hurricane, which was up to 70 knots, as my fiance likes to say, died down. And the heat came back. We were under heat advisory. And so I called up my aunt and said, hey, can we please come back? We were out here for 4th of July weekend having a lovely time. And she said, sure. So we drove out, packed up the pets and everything from the freezer, moved it into the freezer here. And we've been hanging out. Now, I did have to drive into Houston on Wednesday and Thursday for work. I delegated today, so I did not have to drive in. All the cases are getting dismissed, so happy clients and all, but it's a 3-hour round trip drive, which is just a lot to do every day. And for those of you who commute regularly, my sympathies are with you because that is not something I normally do. Thankfully, I'm in town in Houston, and getting down to the courts takes about 20 minutes from where I live, so I am not used to these really long commutes. I had planned to share my super mega fabric haul from High Fashion, and obviously we are not in my sewing room. We are not in Sew Lounge. And instead, I'm going to be ripping out the dress from last week's video because that's what I've got with me. And initially I had thought that I would make this video in this time frame because, I want to get this dress resewn, but I was not necessarily making it as an immediate follow-up to last week's video, but I have nothing else. So bear with me. And if this topic is not something you want to watch, please feel free to check out another video. This is kind of impromptu. I'm using my tablet to record. We have no studio lighting. I have no microphones. I'm using my earbuds, which thankfully seem to be working pretty well so far. And, when I was initially thinking about making this video, I was going to talk about the merits of ripping and all that stuff. And, how there's kind of zen in the art of seam ripping. And it's something I've gotten to be very good at over the years because I've done a lot of seam ripping. So that's what we're working on today. It is not super exciting. It is not something that I do very fast because in my experience, when you try and seam rip too fast, sometimes you poke holes in your fabric. And that is never something I want to do. And I really like this fabric, so that's another reason to go through this process and make this happen. There was supposed to be a live stream on Saturday, the 13th, if you tuned in for the last one or caught the replay. That has been postponed until the 20th because one of the beautiful things about Centerpoint Energy in Houston is that they're not giving any time estimates on when things are going to be fixed or any priority or schedule of when the neighborhoods are going to get back online. So I have no idea how long I'm going to be out here. It is entirely possible I will have to drive into Houston on Monday. Thankfully, Dan is going to go with me, and he got some chainsaw fuel to cut up the large limbs that fell in the yard, thankfully, because if the one in the front yard had gone towards the house, it would have hit the roof over the sewing room and potentially cause some major roof damage that then in turn would have caused major damage to the fabric stash and the sewing machines that are in that front section of that room. So thank you, Jesus, that did not happen, because that would have been a real mess. And then the other tree limb that came down didn't completely come off, and it instead kind of got caught on the pine tree. And so only a tiny piece of it is on the edge of the roof, which is also fantastic because that's where my computer system is set up in my house, and all of my editing equipment and printer and monitors and all that good stuff is right there in that corner. So once again, I'm very grateful that I did not have any major damage. A lot of people were not so lucky in Houston. If you were in Houston, I hope that you were okay. I sent out an email to my list earlier on Wednesday, actually, once I kind of got back from work and got organized and remembered that I was supposed to have a live stream this week. And Jill's up in North Houston. So Jill, I hope you are okay, and that your power gets restored quickly. I have some friends who live on that side of town, and some of them have power, some of them don't. So, it's a crazy kind of experience to be in the fourth largest city and to have 1 million people still not have power, or 1 million households not have power. I think it's more if you say households than people, because, Anyway, I am working on ripping out the facing on the sleeve. And the funny thing is I started doing this before I put on the dress and realized that the whole thing was a problem. And now looking back, I don't know. I was thinking about it because it's so much wider than it needs to be, especially the neckline. I'm wondering if I added a seam allowance to the center front fold seam. I don't know because I don't have the pattern with me. I just brought the dress, and that could have been part of the reason that the neckline was so spread out, because it definitely looks wider than it does in the picture. But if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. It's pretty entertaining. And if you left a comment on that video about how now you feel like, you're not alone in making mistakes, and that you enjoyed me sharing my mistakes, you are very welcome, because I make a lot of mistakes. And when I first started making YouTube videos, I thought that I had to be perfect all the time. So I cut out those scenes, which is a shame because some of those were pretty hysterical bad mistakes. I made a patch pocket that was completely wonky on all sides, and it was just a total mess. And I should have saved that. But, I was just starting out, and I wanted to look like I knew what I was doing, since, I did major in textile and apparel design in college. And in theory, I should be able to do all of these things in my sleep. But, the funny thing is, when you are not sewing for long periods of time, you get out of the habit of doing it. And that's when you start making mistakes. Now, I say stupid mistakes because they're stupid for me. If you're just learning, they're just learning mistakes. It's a completely different situation. But for me, the mistakes I made when I was making this dress were just stupid mistakes. Like, I know better. I know how to mark things. I shouldn't have made these mistakes, but I'm out of practice because I haven't sewn anything in a while. And the last thing I sewed was that blue dress. That was the New Look pattern. And that actually turned out pretty well, all things considered. But for some reason, I just, the reality is that when I put myself under a deadline, even an arbitrary 2-hour challenge, and it's like, I don't have to stick to that, obviously, because that's kind of part of the video to see if I can do it or not, or how far I get in 2 hours. It still makes the filming and everything more complicated because I got to set the timer, and I got to remember to set the timer, and at some point I just lost track of everything. And it happens. It happens to all of us. If you say you don't make mistakes, I'm not going to call you a liar to your face, but I will question you for sure, because I just don't see how anyone can sew and not make mistakes, even on occasion. And the reality is, when I sew regularly, I still make mistakes. I just don't make them as often. And I tend to not make the stupid ones, like forgetting to clip the seam before I did the understitching. And then I had this lovely fluttered little facing because I didn't do that, which in hindsight doesn't matter, right? Because I'm ripping the whole garment apart and I'm going to end up cutting that off anyway, because it's one of those things that, you know, the whole pattern's too big. Although I don't remember if it's too big in the arms. I have to go back and look at where I added. I think I just added in the seam seam. So the fact that I didn't add anything to the sleeves, maybe it's better that I didn't trim those seams, because now they're going to be the right size when I go back and add or cut the rest of the pattern down to the size 14. And so it's just interesting. I mean, it's interesting to see how things turn out and what I could have done better, because, you know, it's an experiment. It's a process. And the thing about sewing is the more you do it, the better you get. And maybe, if you're doing it for a really long time and getting really, really amazing at your craft, you'd make very few mistakes ever. My great aunt Eunice was apparently she was like a couture tailor. My grandma did not have a lot of details on that because it was my grandfather's sister, but she used to make clothes for women who would go to New York and get, go see inspirations, and then she'd describe them, or they'd be described to her, and she would write, draw up the drawings, and then they'd make adjustments, and then she'd just make her own patterns and everything. And so that's in my genetics, but I was never trained to do that kind of super high-end couture sewing or tailoring or anything like that. At best, my experience at UT Austin in the textile and apparel program was, rudimentary, I guess. That's a good way to say it. I was talking with my friend Jean, or we were emailing, and she also majored in, design and learned to sew. And, she went to more of a specific school for that. So she had more intense classes than I did. And we were talking about the pattern making book by Helen Bishop Armstrong. I can't believe I totally got that wrong. Helen Joseph Armstrong. Second edition of the book. I did go back and check when Jean and I were having this whole discussion about it. It's kind of a big textbook. Has a kind of a taupe colored cover, like an 80s style fashion designing. Don't use that book. This is your warning. Which we both used, in college. And the book is wrong. And so this is the book that I learned to make patterns with. And some of these basic blocks, like when you make the sloper, it's wrong. It's just not right. And I remember my professors being like, "Oh no, we're not gonna use the instructions in the book. We're going to, we're just gonna use these size 12 slopers, and you could just trace them off, and then that's what we use to make all our pattern pieces," because the book was wrong. So basically, what that meant was, anytime you use that book for any other pattern making, you were gonna have problems. Specifically, in my experience, was related to a halter dress that I was making. So I was using the instructions to make the halter, and it just didn't fit. It was gaping. And I thought it was me because, I was so inexperienced in everything I was doing at the time. But then one of the more senior students, who actually sewed incredibly well, she used the same instructions to make a halter dress, and she had the same problems. So to me, that meant it wasn't me, it was the instructions. And the fact that our professors used this book as curriculum, and this was an expensive book, it was a $95 book, and didn't how can you do that? And so Jean and I were discussing how much we hate this book, and she said she had the exact same problems. And it's just that the book's wrong. And I didn't find that out until I went to grad school. And I had my book out, and my professor there was like, "Why are you using this book? It's wrong." And I'm like, "What?" So, I don't claim to be perfect by any means or make great patterns, which is also why I'm kind of a little bit nervous about my wedding dress plans. But I do have a base pattern for that. And I am going to make it up in muslin first. I should have done that with this dress. I know that there were some comments about doing that first to get the fit right. I'm just impatient. When I want to sew, I want to sit down and sew. I want to make something that I can wear, like, to dinner 2 nights away, or at the end of the week. But that's just me. My friend Jen makes everything up in a toile in some other lesser fabric that's similar to the one that she wants to use for the actual thing to get the fit right. And then if it doesn't fit her, she usually gives it to her daughter. Or, if it's really ill-fitting, she might not wear it at all, but usually she gives it to her daughter to wear, around the house as sleepwear or something like that. So, a lot of you suggested that was what I should have done with this dress, which is great in hindsight. But, for me, I just like getting it done. I just want to sew it and make it happen, make it work. It's probably because I watched too much Project Runway while I was in law school and not actually sewing. Although I don't love, the idea of having to sew a 2-piece collection in 2 days is crazy, even if you have help sewing. I mean, and Next in Fashion is one of my guilty pleasures. And I hope it's coming out this month. I think that's usually when it happens, is in July. I do love it, but it's like sometimes I'm like, how much of this is TV drama and not actual, like they actually have more time, but then they're pretending like they're not having more time? I don't know. There's not enough crying in it for me to really believe that they're on the clock for that actual time. So I'm trying to think of what else to talk about. This is slow going ripping. I might switch. So I'm using this. Let's see, what am I using? I'm using a Seam Fix seam ripper. There you go. And it has like this little rubbery top. I don't really know what that's for, except maybe pulling the threads off once you seam rip them, because it kind of works to do that. I'm kind of just leaving these because I don't want to leave them on the carpet. I should probably go get a glass or something to put these all in so it doesn't make a huge mess. There we go. I found, I'm gonna put this little pile over here. I found that if you rip on the top side, then that bobbin thread comes off in like one long strip, because there are ways to rip faster. Back in college, I spent my entire spring break working on my project for my portfolio class, which was basically where we had to do like mini collections for things. And I made this really cool top that I really liked. It was like a peasant blouse, and it was 2 layers. It was like a lining, and then there was like this, I don't know if it was lawn. I think it was voile. So it was a lightweight, very sheer cotton. That's why it needed a lining. And I did it like blue and purple because I had this weird colored purpley blue pant that it was matching with, and I couldn't find the right fabric. So, but the two together made it happen. And I put the whole thing together, and the neck looked really nice. And I showed it to my professor, and she's like, well, how are you going to finish the hem? And I was like, what? No, I got that wrong. It was not that. I got it all put together and didn't know how I was going to finish the neckline. That's what it was. Because the hem would have been easy if the neckline had been done. And then she's like, well, you just have to rip the whole thing out. My professor, Dr. Rewards, may she rest in peace, was a little bit harsh with us, and didn't take it well when we started crying. There was a lot of tears in some of my fashion classes. Anyway, I was just like really, really upset. One of my classmates, Stephanie, she was always ahead of everybody. She like sewed really, really fast. I don't know how she did that. She'd been sewing since she was like 12 though, so she was ahead of the curve. She's like, just give it to me, go eat lunch, I'll have it done by the time you get back. I'm like, how are you going to get that done that fast? She's like a master ripper. She did it so fast, and I should have asked how, but at the time I still had to finish my project, and I'd already sacrificed like half of my spring break and then had to rip this thing out. So I did not ask her. There are ways to do this faster. Not talking while doing it. is a faster way to get things ripped out. But I'm almost done. Look, I've got almost one facing done. I'm going to start on this side because this is the other side. I think I kind of sewed it funny. So looking at this, it looks like, oh no, that's the seam. Okay, yeah, no, there was no clipping of any kind on this. You can see it's like perfectly sized seam allowance, no clipping, no trimming, and that's why it still has this little flutter effect when you look at it, because it was that poorly sewn. But that's okay, because I'm going to fix it all, and it's going to work. And a lot of you commented on Jiffy patterns in general and them not fitting well and sizing and all that. And I did measure the pattern, and it seemed like it was going to be too small. So I'm not sure if I added too much seam allowance or maybe not enough in some places, but too much in others. So we'll see how we get this going once I start taking the whole thing apart. And I think I'm going to rip that zipper later. I did wash this so that the Wonder Tape would all wash out. And I was thinking that maybe since I have part of the hem in, I won't have to redo that. But then I was thinking I might because of the slits on the side. So, because I think I added extra width to one side but not the other. There's all kinds of craziness happening here. It's just what happened. And maybe next time I will do this a little differently. So I'm just going to keep ripping this out. And I hope you are safe and have electricity wherever you are. If you're in part of the country with the fires, I hope you're staying safe. If you're in the other part of the country with the crazy heat wave and insane heat indexes, I hope you're staying cool, because that's what I'm doing, and just waiting for the power to come back on. So next week there will be a more regular looking video, but for now, this is as good as it's gonna get. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and that you are staying safe. Happy sewing.